Hello, everybody. I think it's always worse being the third one in the series of plenaries because, in fact, your esteemed colleagues have usually said most of what you are going to say, and I found myself scratching out, oh, well, they've said that, oh, they've said that. So hopefully I'll be a little quicker than I might have been. Can I just also be clear that I'm speaking entirely in a personal capacity? Anything I say represents absolutely nobody's views but my own, and certainly doesn't represent any of the organisations that I currently work for or have ever worked for. So this is entirely in my own capacity. And I apologise, it will be fairly UK-centric, and so we'll have that focus because that is my experience. You've heard an awful lot about what I do, and it makes me sound ever so grand, which I'm not at all. But at the moment, I kind of have my life working in three different ways. I have some non-executive roles, and I'm the chairman of Ofsted that you've heard about in that, and run a property company in that. And I also sit on things like the board of the Royal Navy. And more recently, I've joined the board of the Treasury, the UK Treasury. And that's really interesting. So one of the things I can say with absolute certainty for the UK, but I have a feeling it has resonance around the world, is the fact that we don't have very much money. So we're going to have to find ways of doing things much, much smarter. And for me, technology will lead that. And I can honestly say we don't have very much money in the UK. What I'm going to talk about a little bit is a little bit about why I think we need a revolution in learning and education, a little bit about the technology that's around, although we've heard a lot about that, probably quite a lot about customers, because I think we don't see them enough and we don't understand what they want, and a little bit about what might bring around the revolution, as I see it, in learning. But just to kick off with, what are some of the challenges that's facing the learning environments, that's facing education? And as I say, this will be a bit UK-centric and entirely my personal view. We've kind of got a credibility gap going on in the UK at the moment, where we are saying, as the UK, to our pupils, you need to get 5 GCSEs with English and maths at the age of 16 in order to be a success. Well, we have a credibility gap with that for a number of reasons. First off is that not quite, but nearly 70% of parents whose children are in state schools in England didn't get what was then 5 O-levels, 5 GCSEs with English and maths. We've had consistent failure in that, and yet pupils look at their parents and think they're a reasonable success. I didn't get 5 GCSEs with English and maths. In fact, I didn't complete school at all. I got thrown out for being naughty. But I was allowed back to do my exams, and I got 1. So I have 1 O-level in biology, and I'm very proud of it. So when my kids look at me and I say, you've got to get 5 GCSEs in English and maths, come on, I don't care if they're bored, boring, I don't care if you're bored, you will get them or you'll fail. They go, well, you didn't, Mum. So we have a credibility gap for that reason. But equally, we have a credibility gap because the generation above those pupils have now all graduated from university, and we've got for at least 2 or 3 decades, the highest youth unemployment. So people with degrees are not getting jobs. So I think there's a credibility gap, and I think we need to do something about that. And I think there's a real relevance gap. When you look at what is our core curriculums, and this is around the world, they are not relevant to what children's lives are and to what they are experiencing. We hear the relevance gap from employers who say when a new employee, a young employee turns up in my business, they don't know how to behave in the workplace. The standards that they've reached are not useful to my company. We have a relevance gap. If you take the Royal Navy, I sit on the board of the Royal Navy, children are more prepared for their flight simulation exercises. By the way, the Royal Navy flies a lot of things as well as sails a lot of things, by the games they played in their bedrooms, not by what they've learnt in their schools. We have a relevance gap and a credibility gap for young people because they see other people getting on in other ways. We heard about the X Factor earlier. Well, I can just get famous. Or I can play my guitar in my bedroom and I can just get famous. So education and the structured system of learning, I think, is facing a relevance and a credibility gap. And you see that being bashed all the time from outside. Standards aren't what they were. In my day, we used to do A-levels and they were so much harder than they are today. So there's also bashing from all around. It's not just young people or employers that are losing faith. Universities are developing their own entrance exams for people because they don't believe that what they see is what's there. I think there are other real challenges. What you've seen happening in London certainly isn't happening all over the UK. Certainly my experience as chairman of Ofsted in going around and shadowing a number of inspections, clearly I don't do them with 1 O-level. I am not an inspector. I just shadow what the inspectors do. I see what they do. And I go into schools and I see a real fear of technology from the teachers, from the educators, from the governors. They don't understand it and they don't really like it. And that's fairly true. And I see more schools that ban mobile phones than use mobile phones as a tool for engagement of their pupils. Enlightened schools insist that their pupils bring their mobile phones with them because they know they've got them, and they insist if they have broadband, Bluetooth, they turn it on. Really simple way of tracking where your kids are, really simple way of communicating lesson plans, changes to timetables. Ofsted's coming, look busy. You can just Bluetooth it and text it. If they've got their phones off, you can't. So there's a fear, there's not an understanding of how we could use technology, where it can take you. But that isn't just in schools or learning. That's actually a lot of the time in the workplace. I got to Ofsted and I had 5 minutes spare, as you do, and I thought, I'll just update my Facebook. Banned. Thought, well, go on Twitter. Update me Twitter. Banned. Government in the UK is that scared of it that they ban most sites that we may use on a daily basis. One of Ofsted's remits is to communicate with and represent the interests of looked after children. Those are the children who aren't brought up by their parents or family members, they're brought up by the state, and the state does for them the role of parenting. We can't even communicate them, we can't even have a Facebook page to talk to them. This is ridiculous. We have to embrace the technology that's there, not be terrified of it. I think another challenge that we really face is we are unbelievably divorced from our customer. And I've said that before. We don't perceive who our customer is. We don't understand what they need. We are governed by the structures and the institutions, not by the content, the learning, or the customer. And that means that it's very difficult, I think, to implement change. I think we're governed by vested interests. I hate to say this because some of you will be those vested interests. And the one vested interest that I see that has the least voice is that of the customer. So the unions have a voice that represent the teachers. The government has a voice that represents its standard way of learning and its standards and its curriculum. The people who don't seem to have much of a voice for their vested interest are, in fact, the learners. So I think there are a number of challenges that we really have to begin to overcome, not least that when we think about learning, we still think about it in a two-dimensional way. And we heard a lot about that from Lord Putnam. Where is the three-dimensional concepts of learning? And I think we also think about learning as single stimulation. I was sat at home the other day, throwing up. I'd like to say I was ill. I think I just drunk too much the night before. And it was the day of the launch of Ofsted's annual report. And I was sat there in bed with my bucket, puking, embarrassingly, 2 laptops on with between them 5 news stations broadcasting at me, and I was having a quick game of online poker, as you do. That's multiple stimulation, and that's how kids are being brought up now. Well, they're clearly not being brought up to be alcoholics and vomit in buckets, but generally, that's how they are being brought up, and yet we do everything in a one stimulational dimension. Which I don't think helps. But I do want to talk about some of the examples where I think we are using technology, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worst, and then come on to what I think the customers need. In schools, we saw whiteboards being used from Brian's presentation. And I'll just give you one example of what I think is a really great use of an interactive tool. I took my children to Lebanon after the bombing there in the south of Lebanon to see the impact. I'm really odd. I just put that up front. I took my kids to a minefield to see the damage that cluster bombs do with a bomb disposal expert to have a look at it. And it is really, God, does that tell you something about why you don't want a war? Just seeing these walls splattered with these shells of these cluster bombs and meeting the limbless children that are left as a result of the